Hello everyone, Unknown Reefer here, bringing you another video, bringing you a slightly different video today. What I want to do is I want to go through and talk about the various tank disasters that I've had, because they're basically all my fault for doing things wrong, so hopefully this will help people avoid the mistakes that I've made. It'll put into context a bit when in some of my other videos I've discussed about what's happened and how fish have survived through various disasters, and kind of gives you an idea of how I got to where I am now in the hobby. So I started out with a little 80 litre tank that was a spare tank that I'd actually had my son use as fresh water. That went well, didn't really have any problems with that until I then went up to 125 litre tank. I bought a second-hand fluval tropical tank, 125 litre. Cut a bit out of the cabinet underneath, reinforced the cabinet where I'd cut stuff out, and I used the 80 litre tank as a sump. Now, that did work well, but the problem I had was I tried to use a canister filter as a overflow essentially. So I used the canister filter to pump the water out. I had some carbon and think maybe some rower in the canister filter. Pumped that out. That went into the sump area. The sump area had my skimmer and my heater, and then it went back up into the tank via a return pump. Now the problem I had with that is no matter what I did, I could not get the two pumps to balance. To the point that they'd let me just grab tea. They would balance for 12 hours and then a bit of muck would get inside one of the pumps and it would slow down and my sump would go to overflow. I didn't have any major leaks in that, but I did have a few little leaks because of that where it overflowed the sump. But the main problem I had with that was that the water level changed, and at the time I ran a hang-on skimmer, but it was a hang-on skimmer, so the skimmer went inside the tank and it had a little bracket to hang it on the side of the tank so you could level it off. And what happened was, because the water level changed, the skimmer overflowed and it managed to overflow onto the bracket that was holding it on the side of the tank. And then because it overflowed onto the bracket, it did it overnight, and I came downstairs in the morning to find that the 40 litres of water on the sump had emptied itself out into the living room onto the living room carpet. And as you can imagine, the wife was not best pleased. I got that sorted, and in the end I did actually get a hang-on overflow, which I will talk about my sort of opinion on hang-on overflows a bit later on in the video. Trying to go from start to finish on when I had my disasters. Now the second sort of big disaster I had in that tank was my auto top-off getting knocked into the sump, so it wasn't working. That then caused the auto top-off basically to not top the tank off. And as you know, your salt level should be 1.24, 1.25. It actually rose to 1.3. And I actually lost a quite nice carpenter's flasher wrasse. The rest of the corals and things didn't look too upset, but this wrasse, I walked past the tank, thought he was looking a bit unhappy, and then by the time I'd realised what was up, he died. As I've said before, I find that wrasses are actually quite a sensitive fish to water conditions. Not so much to stress, but definitely water conditions. So, that's another note, is make sure if you fiddle with your auto top-offs, you at least turn them back on, but make sure they're at the same level that they usually are. And if you do have any hang-on skimmers, make sure that you've got some provision for if they overflow, or you've got some way to stop the bracket leaking water out the tank. Now, the last, I didn't think it was actually that tank. I upgraded from that tank because it got a little leak. One of the seals went. It was only a weeping little drip. It wasn't too bad, but it was a good excuse to the wife to get a different tank. So I went up to a 200 litre tropical tank, which I then had an overflow box on the side of it, and I also had the 80 litre tank still as a sump, and that ran quite well. Main big disaster I had in that tank was the Blenny. I had a Starry Blenny. I actually had him from the time I had the 80 litre tank. Bloke in the shop said it was the right size for that, but I would say you need a bigger tank for them. They actually get quite long, probably about as long as this nice silver belly wrasse. Now, he was a bit aggressive towards me anyway. He would bite me if I stuck my arm in the tank to do something. And then one day he just decided to... Well, he'd previously attacked a mandarin, which died. But I couldn't take him out without getting the rockwork apart. So I sort of left him in. I assumed that it was a territorial thing. And because mandarins don't move that fast, it just couldn't get out of the way fast enough. So the Blenny decided it was challenging him. But I would say a couple of months later, the Blenny just decided to go after my diamond goby. Just absolutely hounded him till he killed him. And then I'd put another mandarin in by that time, and he was having to go at the mandarin as well. So I had to completely disassemble my rockwork to get him out. In fact, I had to put the rockwork in a bucket, leave it for 10 minutes, and saw when he swam out of it to move, and then I managed to pull the rockwork out, and I got him out. I traded him in at the shop, and I believe he went to another reef keeper that just had a bigger tank, and as he was a new fish in that tank, I think he was alright. But I would just note to everyone, if you're going to get blennies, if they're things like a starry blenny in particular, when they get a bit bigger, they do get a bit aggressive if they're not in a big enough tank. So make sure you size your tank properly for them. The 200 litre tank was pretty good to me, to be fair. That's when I first started experimenting on, and I put the Chinese black box on it, which actually grew corals really well and made the tank look really good. It just didn't really have much control. It was just on or off. We had two channels, one for the white, one for the blue. But if you're starting out in the hobby and you want a cheap light, you can't go far wrong with the Chinese black boxes. In fact, the shop I buy all my corals from, and most of my fish actually as well, up until recently, he's run all of his tank on Chinese black boxes. And there's also an eBay seller that's actually got, in his garage, got huge lots of coral trays, which I've bought some parts off of. Bought these, got this one that sticks off of him, and the ones at the back. He grows everything under Chinese black boxes, so they are worth a go. Just be aware that they are very bright directly underneath them. So there's a few things that you can do, raise them up high. And if you're slightly tech-minded like me, I did actually swap out a few of the yellow LEDs for some purples, and I angled the LEDs out a little bit. But out of the box, they will work, and I think you can get them from 80, 100 quid, something like that. So, with my 200 litre tank, I liked it, but as in this hobby, I wanted to go bigger. So I decided to get a bigger tank. I was going for a 4 foot. This is currently a 5 foot. But I went for a 4 foot tank. I was looking around on the Facebook marketplace and the local groups, and I found a 400 litre tank for 50 quid. I went and got it. It was a bit beaten up, but I thought it was actually, most of it was in alright nick. It had a double base. It was like somebody had some snowflake eels in it previously, but it was dry when I got it. And it had chips out of these bottom corners. But it had a double layer of glass on the bottom of the tank, so it all looked good. It was all alright. I had the wife and the kids go out one day. I got everything ready, and I had to get her to help me lift the new tank in. But other than that, I managed to get everything sort of transferred out to holding tanks whilst I filled this new one up. So it went in, it looked good, I was all excited, and then it started leaking from some seals. It was mostly down the bottom, sort of the bit where there was a seal here. Didn't go up quite as far on this, on the inside of the glass, and it was sort of weeping out this joint on the bottom two panes of glass. Now I tried for a good couple of weeks to seal it from the outside, and believe me, you won't be able to seal it from the outside. Even though it was a little sort of weep, a little drip of water, and at one point it was kind of dripping off the cabinet and going backwards and it dripped into the sump. Eventually it started leaking down the wall as well. So believe me, if you get a leak, especially on a big tank, especially if it's down towards the bottom, don't try and seal it from the outside. That tank, knowing what I know now, because I'm currently studying engineering and water pressures and stuff, the problem was it was okay when it was about half filled. So I kept leak testing it and it was okay. And then once I filled it all the way up, the pressure of the water was enough to push the seams apart and actually weep a bit of water out. So that tank, after being filled up, had to get completely emptied. All my fish and corals went into holding tanks, and I resealed it. Wasn't too bad of a job. It was I cut the original silicone out of the way, left a little bit in the corners to actually keep the tank held together. And what I did was I did sort of one corner at a time so the tank wouldn't fall apart. That particular tank had sort of bracing going across the top, so I didn't need to redo the sealant on that. It was holding strong enough. It was just the ones that came into contact with water I changed. So I managed to get that that changed out. And unfortunately, in doing that, because I had to leave it a few days for the sealant to cure, I lost a nem and several corals. I had a couple of different holding tanks on the go. One, my old 125 litre, held most of the fish and quite a bit of the coral, and then I had some other coral with the top off so it could get some natural daylight to it because it was in the conservatory. I had that with a heater with the nem in the little 80 litre tank that I used as a sump, because I'd actually been and got a Red Sea Reefer sump to go with this new tank as well. And the heater went in the tank that was holding my nem and my corals, so it got hot enough, it killed the nem overnight. And as some of you might know, if a nem dies, it releases all its chemicals into the tank and it killed off all the coral. So I lost quite a bit of coral in that complete disaster. So it was like a twofold disaster. It was the new tanker got leaked, and then when I transferred everything out and put them into holding, the heater went and I lost a lot of stock. So the two takeaways from this is if you're going to buy a new tank, leak test it when it's completely full. And if it is an older tank, don't be scared of resealing it, and don't do what I did. Get really excited, and the day you bring it home, transfer everything over and hope for the best. And the second takeaway is, if you're going to put heaters into backup tanks or just a heater in your tank, make sure the thermostat works properly on it. I actually run in this tank, I run an Inkbird temperature controller with a couple of heaters. So I would recommend getting an external temperature controller, because the little coils that they use as the thermostats inside a lot of the cheaper heaters do go. So your temperature will go crazy, and that you can lose a lot of livestock very quickly. So we're now sort of up to when I had the 4-foot tank. Now I had that probably about 6 months it was going, and that's when I got Pedro the Purple Tang, because I had a tank big enough for him. So it stood about as tall as this, but the cabinet it was on was lower. It was probably sort of level with maybe that door. So it was a very tall tank. So it was an absolute pig to work on. Lighting was all right for it with my black box LED, but it just didn't get the coverage I wanted. It was kind of a big beam in the middle. So I bought some T5s, which worked really well, really lit the tank up. But I found that I had two chalices. I had this one, which was a lot smaller at the time, and one that was bigger than this, a nice bright red one. It was absolutely awesome. I got it off a fellow reef keeper locally. I think I only paid about 30 quid. It was an absolute steal. And it was kind of essentially the equivalent of being over where these Zoas are. Although my rockscape was different, it was about the same sort of height in the rockwork. And I put the T5s on, and within a couple of days, that chalice was dead. It just completely receded and died off. So it didn't like the light. I have found trying this various different places, that a lot of chalices don't like mega amounts of light. And I really underestimated the power of the T5s. So my takeaway from that would be, by all means, use T5s. They are cheap to set up. They're another, either with the Chinese black box or even on their own. You can get some really nice colour in your tank. Not so much the actinic LEDs, although there are tubes that can do that. So you might even want like a cheap Chinese light for the blues, and then run some reef purples or even tropical T5s will give you a nice look to your tank. But if you're going to put T5s in, be careful. If you've got any corals that don't like the light too much, make sure they are in shaded areas, or they are lower down in the tank, and slowly bring them up as you go around. So I was happy with that 4-foot tank. That was going to be my be all and end all tank whilst we're definitely in this house, because it's not the biggest house in the world. And it was pushing my luck getting a 4-foot with a wife. And with that, I then had the biggest disaster I've ever had. When I built the cabinet up, because I used the 200 litre tank cabinet and I built a frame around it, I didn't completely level off the back. There was about a 5mm difference in the back corner, but I did put some shims in the back of it, so it was supported pretty much everywhere along that. But I obviously didn't cover every single bit of that back corner. And the biggest mistake I made, I think, I didn't use, like, even on this tank, it comes new with a decent cabinet. See, you have this foam here, and I even have it in my sump. And that just helps level out any imperfections in the cabinet, and even if you've got it slightly off centre, then that can help sort of take a bit of the pressure off the tank. So because I didn't do that, I had a foot-long crack in this back corner of the 4-foot tank. So it emptied itself over my living room floor. And luckily it was in the middle of the day, so I was actually awake, but it did leak, and I had to put everything in holding. I had to have the insurance give me new carpets because I had accidental cover. It was a total and utter disaster. We had a family barbecue planned because it was just coming out of lockdown. And with the family barbecue being planned, they had to come round, and all the carpet was cut up and taken out in the living room. So I was really in the bad books with the missus for that one. And to be honest, I was ready to just call it a day on reefing at that point. I'd had enough with all the disasters, all the learning curves. I'd had enough. Because that tank is also where I maybe had the most problems with the hang-on overflows. Slightly going back, the hang-on overflows, I tried a Tunzi one and I had a different brand one. And I found that the hang-on overflows are very good, they work very well, but they're very noisy. And I did lots of things of trying to put pipes in, trying to cut pipes or holes in to prevent air traps, and basically I nearly caused leaks out of the tank and changed the water levels in the tank several times. Nothing major disasters, but it was just a pain in the arse. Lots of time trying to change pipework, fitting valves and all sorts. It was so much work. But I had this 4-foot tank, so I persevered on. But when it broke, I was ready to call it a day. But strangely enough, the missus convinced me to keep going. I think it's because then I spend all my money on this and I don't have money to get into trouble with anything else. But yeah, I then sort of put everything back into holding, all my corals in plastic box, and then I took the decision that if I was going to keep doing the reefing hobby, I was going to do it properly. I was going to go all out. I was going to make my life easier. So I bought these lights, the Max Spec jumps. I bought this DD Reef Pro 1500 that's got the sump and everything all built in, and I just went all out. Credit card took a hammering, which is still being paid back, but I think it was worth it. I'm really, really pleased with this tank. And although I do still faff, like I've put the obviously I have put the filter roller in this tank, refugium, I've got UV, I've got my reactor there going. Although I do faff, it is still far, far easier than all my sort of DIY methods trying to do it on the cheap. So if you're going to do something, maybe have a little tank to check that you like the hobby, and then I would recommend just going for, I know they're expensive, but if you can afford it, it will save you lots of hassle. Oh, blimey, my arrows. Fish that. And Geogubby's out. I would recommend just going for the Reef Pro. Yeah, so that's all my tank disasters. Hopefully you can learn from them. Thanks a lot for watching.